The Lido in Paris is aflame with celebrities on the Champs-Élysées for the opening of a new and zesty show. Everybody who is anybody is there. The Duke of Windsor heads the notables, which include Michelle Morgan and the famous mustache of Salvador Dali and veteran Maurice Chevalier. The show itself scores an instant hit for the festive season, as well as the dancing which follows. Author Francois Sagan sets the pace for an occasion that is truly Parisian, truly festive, and in every sense, a success.
Science and technology policy, lacking in that female diversity, not asking for a handout, just thinking about how to fix the drought. Your own science proves it, hon. We bring the heat. Inclusion makes a brighter sector for us all, for our benefit. Let's bring the lights out and shine. Come on, equality begins with you and me. We're making new history, equally, all in one sector. Look at what we can be. Shh.
Oh, how nice of you to join us again. I'm sure the science and technology policy lady is already waiting for us in the cafeteria. Follow me. Last lunch hour, we focused on the reasons why we have a lack of women in the science and technology policy sector.
Systemic issues of gender bias and education.
And started to focus on the plan to help.
Your individual actions can make a difference by becoming an intersectional feminist or an ally to one. Be a role model as a woman in a leadership or STEM role. Seeing you in these roles plays a big part in inspiring other girls and women. What we do individually is just as important as what governments, organizations, and institutions do, but their role in addressing these systemic issues of gender bias and education that often overlap, that lead to the lack of women in the science and technology policy sector, is crucial for sustainable change.
That's what we will be discussing this lunch hour in our third episode, The Big Picture.
First, it helps to understand which countries are further ahead in terms of basic education and equal education opportunities for young girls and women, which includes STEM subjects and equal leadership opportunities, and which countries are the furthest behind. Each country will have a different starting point during its journey for gender parity within science and technology policy, and it helps to start simple when classifying countries and their starting points.
The core issue begins at an early age regarding education. More women need to be educated in STEM subjects, which includes science and technology, as well as policy making, and both are incorporated into science and technology policy. True equality lies in the educational systems that we have in place. Globally, this is an incredibly difficult feat to overcome.
One of the reasons for this is because the problems faced are global, systemic issues of how women are directed to learn, with some countries being more advanced in this journey, while others are still discouraging women from these fields. And some countries deny women basic education or have no education to offer in certain areas. Basic education is, of course, a necessary step before leading into the fields of science and technology, as well as policy making, and ultimately leading to science and technology policy. And although basic education is a separate issue, it is one that is linked directly to opening more avenues for women into this arena. Because if women do not have equal opportunities to basic education, such as kindergarten through high school education, then they will have even less opportunities to access STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics programs if they are available. In terms of policymaking, women have even less opportunities to become involved in educational programs that make them eligible to be in positions to help implement these changes. This systemic oppression begins with girls and women being denied or having less access to basic education because without basic education, women won't be eligible to participate in STEM programs or policymaking, which excludes them from being eligible to be candidates to help become the instruments of change to allow for more basic access to education to begin with. This cycle, starting from a very young age, automatically excludes girls and women from entering this field in some countries, and even in first world countries, women have the odds against them of becoming part of the science and technology policy community. In order to be involved in science and technology policy, you must have a strong background in the STEM sector and/or policy making, which puts women at a disadvantage in both fields to begin with, let alone involving a field comprised of a strong background of both. The root problem of how women are viewed in terms of what they are valued by in their local societies, as well as global standards, dictates what public system of education is available to them. Whether science and technology programs are available and equally accessible to men and women, and whether programs that specify in policymaking and leadership are equally accessible to both men and women.
This is assuming these programs are even available at all, which we know in a substantial amount of countries they are not. Classifying countries can help us address current issues and move forward.
Countries will be divided into red, yellow, and green categories, determined by certain factors regarding women and what resources are available to them through education in STEM fields and policy making and leadership. If a country is categorized as red, that means that there is little to no basic education available to girls and women. This may include men as well, but our focus is on women, and no access to programs involving STEM subjects or policy making and leadership. If a country is categorized as yellow, it means that there is basic education available to girls and women, but little to no access to programs involving STEM subjects or policy making and leadership, or it is highly discouraged. If a country is categorized as green, it means that there is both basic education and programs available in STEM subjects, as well as policy making and leadership programs available to girls and women. But this categorization does not take into account separate factors that may make women ineligible for this type of education and these programs, such as whether individuals can afford this type of education. It just means that they are not excluded from these types of education available. For instance, the United Kingdom or the United States might be labeled green by these variables, but that does not mean that every female has access to these programs within the country or can afford to purchase this kind of education. It simply means that they are not excluded from participation. Please note that this system is purposefully simple in structure to create a categorization to understand the most basic needs for improvement, even though there are many variables that will need to be taken into account based on each country's situation. Also, this system is including gender bias as a factor within education to help it stay as simplified as possible, again, to understand the first basic steps needed to improve first. By setting up this structural categorization, each country will be placed where it is currently in the red, yellow, or green zone, and then be assessed to see as to how it can improve based on that country's specific situation regarding women and access to resources and education in STEM subjects, as well as policy making and leadership, which both lead into science and technology policy. Once the problems in each area are assessed, the process can then begin to progress in the changes necessary to improve to the next zone or to fine-tune details within the green zone, seeing as there can always be improvement. This categorization is meant to help as a problem-solving tool to assess and improve each country's situation individually so that countries can then work better collectively, with girls and women able to ultimately have more access to the resources and education necessary to achieve gender parity within the science and technology policy community globally, which bears hefty significance. As we see communities strive for equity, we must constantly reassess what the necessary steps are to achieve the goal of equality within the community for all, which always comes back to education and resources available. Please keep in mind that these are the most basic criteria, and the goal is to move toward gender-responsive education training for STEM, which we covered last lunch hour, which uses approaches that are more relevant to eradicating gender bias.
This kind of educational approach can be added as a goal once all areas in a country are in the green zone.
This categorization is in no way perfect, but it is a good beginning to assess a starting point when specifically addressing the lack of women within the science and technology policy sector due to the issues surrounding gender bias and education, which often overlap, and what governments, institutions, and organizations can work toward as goals depending on their starting point. When addressing any systemic issue, most people can find it very overwhelming, myself included, because deep systemic problems can seem like a system overload for us, whether it be through living in them, studying them, working toward solutions, or all of the above. Simplifying these issues, like with this categorization, and looking at the most basic things that need to be addressed first, can make it seem less intimidating for all parties involved.
It is imperative to practice self-care, no matter what your involvement in these issues are. You need to make sure that your needs are taken care of before you go to help others. Otherwise, you will be bled dry, no matter how good your intentions are. Don't forget to take breaks and keep an eye on your diet. No stress eating. Hey, that wasn't made in the cafeteria. Let's take a look at some of the countries that are farther ahead in their starting points, and also those that have farther to go.
When researching education frameworks and their relation to equal education opportunities that are more likely to focus on inclusive STEM education, while not the only indicator of which countries are implementing successful education approaches, but a strong indicator would be analyzing the countries at the top of the Global Gender Gap Report. Iceland is the most gender equal country in the world for the 12th time, with 89.2% of the gender gap closed to date. Following Iceland, Finland has 86.1% of the gender gap closed to date, with Norway narrowly behind at 84.9%. Analyzing different education frameworks within these countries with the largest percentage of the gender gap closed to date helps provide insight into educational approaches and systems that are working toward eliminating the barriers of gender bias and education that hinders girls and women from entering sectors that lead into science and technology policy. By analyzing frameworks in place that are working, further analyzation can be applied to see how to improve the frameworks already in place, as well as how to adapt these frameworks and apply them in other countries. One clear theme among these Nordic countries is that gender equality work in Nordic education systems start in preschool and early childhood. There has been sustainable collaboration between the Nordic countries for almost 4 decades regarding gender equality, with research on gender and education regarded as a strong and respected field of education research. One distinct feature in Nordic history is state feminism, which refers to a strong alliance between the feminism movement, feminist equality officers, and gender researchers. The Nordic countries not only implement proactive gender policies into their frameworks, into the curricula and practices that the students receive from the very beginning of their educational careers, but also through teacher education and their state feminist collaboration, which creates a strong foundation for equal education opportunities for all genders. While Iceland, Finland, and Norway are leading the world in gender parity and have many collaborative efforts in place to work toward eradicating any issues concerning education and gender bias, it is important to understand that they still have not reached gender equality. Upon further evaluation, it is clear there are still the same issues within these countries, even if they are quite further along than most countries. For instance, when analyzing data related to the leaky pipeline, at the national level of Iceland, while women dominate higher education as the majority, they still predominantly choose social sciences and humanities, while STEM fields remain dominated by men. Additionally, the social sciences and humanities fields have the least amount of funding, the highest teacher-to-student ratio, the least amount of stature, and the fewest options for a future career in academia. Men also overwhelmingly occupy the higher academic positions with the most stature. Finland also follows the same trend as the rest of the countries, despite the immense achievements working toward equality, with younger generations of women being higher educated than men, but behind them in the level of jobs, top positions, and salaries. Additionally, while Finland has one of the highest frequencies of academic women, female students tend to choose medical and humanistic studies, while natural sciences, mathematics, and information technology fields are dominated by male students. What is interesting to note about Norway is that this country is much further along than the global average concerning women and STEM. While globally, women make up less than 30% of researchers, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark's STEM graduate percentage average is between 30 to 35%. While more than half of Norway's scientists and engineers are women, higher than any country in Europe, less than 30% of women are involved within the information technology sector, which is on par with the global average of female researchers. While these countries are further along in terms of the gender gap, it is clear that the global issues associated with education and gender bias are still persistent within these countries, and active plans are still needed at local and global levels to eradicate them. While the Global Gender Gap Report is a strong indicator of which countries will provide more STEM-inclusive programs for all genders, this is not always the case, although these approaches and frameworks should be studied. In Asia, women make up the majority of researchers in Azerbaijan, Thailand, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, and Kuwait. In the Americas, Bolivia, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, Guatemala, Argentina, and Panama have research communities where over half are female. Additionally, over half of Tunisia and New Zealand's researchers are female as well. It is important to understand the reasons these countries were able to achieve gender parity in these research communities. While some followed in the lines of Nordic countries and worked toward gender equality using ambitious welfare and social policies to help women in the workplace, others, especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, see the gender parity in science as a legacy of their membership of the Soviet Union and its satellite bloc, where female participation in science was promoted, encouraged, and often taught in government-funded facilities. With an average population-weighted score of 60.9%, the Middle East and North Africa region has the largest gender gap, about 40% yet to be closed. The progress is slow, and it will take 142.4 years to close the gender gap. Following the Middle East and North Africa, South Asia is the second lowest performer on the index, with 62.3% of its overall gender gap closed.
Thanks for stopping by the cafeteria, and I look forward to seeing you next time for our 4th episode. Science and Technology Policy, Gender Parity, and Intersectionality. Facts for lunch from a real lady.
Science and Technology Policy. Lacking that female diversity. Not asking for a handout, just thinking about how to fix the drought. Your own science proves it, and we bring the heat. Inclusion makes a brighter sector for us all, for our benefit. Let's bring the lights out and shine. Come on, equality begins with you and me.